Zelensky's secret information, how Russia plans to use Belarus. Ukraine is sending a signal to its partners. This is TSN Online. My name is Natalia Ostrovska. Before you watch this video, please like it and write in the comments which news impressed you the most. Let's get started. Sparkling champagne, fervent protests, and tense deputies.
I will defend myself, and I am confident in my victory.
Odessa has been left without a mayor and will now receive a military administration. Who will become the head, and what are the residents afraid of? Tomahawks are at stake.
Peace is achieved through strength, not loud words or finger-pointing threats.
On the eve of the Zelensky-Trump meeting, NATO defense ministers gathered in Brussels. Will they launch a new level of military aid to Ukraine? The Russians have plans for further military exploitation of Belarusian territory. This was stated today by Volodymyr Zelensky after a report by the head of Ukraine's foreign intelligence service, Yulia Kyrienko. Zelensky noted that at this stage, Ukraine will not make this information public. However, partners who may be threatened by this will be warned. Dozens of pieces of equipment and hundreds of soldiers. For the second time in a few days, the Russians launched a mechanized assault on Dobropillya. The occupiers are trying to recapture the village of Volodymyrivka from our defenders, where enemy troops are partially blocked. However, the occupiers' vehicles are burning and their infantry is dying. And it's not just thanks to Ukrainian FPV drones. Ukrainian rocket forces are also helping to repel these attacks. An MLRS system firing long-range rockets once again helped stop the Russian advance. This is a HIMARS-type system. And how it happened was witnessed by TSN special correspondent Yulia Kyrienko. Watch her report next.
A rocket is flying toward a column of Russian vehicles heading to storm the outskirts of Dobropillya. 6 tanks, several dozen armored vehicles, and hundreds of Russian infantry on motorcycles tried to break through to the village of Volodymyrivka to cut off our troops and unblock their own. This is the longest-range MLRS, the American multiple launch rocket system. It is from these launchers that our troops fire ATAK-MS missiles, and now they are about to go into action. However, not with those, but with another type of missile targeting the enemy in the Dobropillya direction. The operator is preparing to fire again. The morning is extremely intense, say the rocket troops. There hasn't been an enemy assault like this on this section of the front for several months in a row. Shots from long-range artillery are echoing from every tree line. There are 2 people operating this MLRS. While one controls the tracked vehicle, the other enters the firing data into the tablet. Another rocket flies toward the convoy and actually stops it. The rocket operators fire the MLRS with such confidence because they are the very first crew of this vehicle since it was delivered to Ukraine by international partners. At the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, the soldiers worked with Smerch systems, and in 2022, even when they went abroad for training, they didn't immediately believe they would switch to the MLRS.
We actually learned everything in just 3 weeks. We arrived and started working with these systems on the 3rd day.
They sent us for training. We completed the course. At first, of course, no one believed that they would actually deliver them to Ukraine. But eventually, to our surprise, we did receive them and immediately got to work.
This rocket system is just like the HIMARS, except that one is wheeled, while the MLRS is on a Bradley-tracked platform, so it's not at all afraid of the muddy fields of Donetsk region. It moves quickly between tree lines to choose the best firing position. With it, the rocket troops destroyed more than one enemy shelter, especially after, a year later in 2023, they received long-range ATAK-MS missiles.
There were artillery pieces, there were command posts, there were UAV posts, there was infantry, there were dugouts, there were structures.
All the targets that exist, all that are possible.
With the ATAK-MS, of course, they could reach even further, deep into the rear of the occupied territories.
It was about a year ago with those ATAK-MS. About a year ago this happened.
300 kilometers up to 500, those are the ones they gave us. You can hit targets located in the rear, including those same command posts.
At that time, the missile forces soldiers significantly decapitated the enemy's army. Now they are covering our assault troops during the Dobropillya operation. They say they're not sparing the missiles and there are reserves, although they've repeatedly felt how political circumstances on the international stage affect supplies.
It comes in waves somehow. Sometimes something up there at the top doesn't work out for them. There were delays. Then, everything got sorted out. Now it's stable. We finished the job, they brought more. For now, there's nothing to work with.
So the launcher heads out to the Donetsk fields again and prepares another rocket for firing. The enemy took advantage of the bad weather and, under the cover of fog, moved in with vehicles to launch an assault. But this fog also works in favor of the rocket crews, as it hides the MLRS from Russian reconnaissance drones, for which such a system is a prime target. To destroy it, the occupiers don't even spare their Iskander. Still, even with the fog, vigilance is essential. So, after each shot, the MLRS crew changes position, and while they're moving to a new one, the vehicle commander receives a message from headquarters. The columns of Russians have been completely stopped. Now it's up to the FPV drone operators, who finish off enemy equipment on the battlefield, burning it to completely halt the Russian assault. Yulia Kyrienko, Alexander Shiyan, Ole Mostovyi, TSN 1+1.
More than half of NATO member states will join the procurement of American weapons for Ukraine under the PURL initiative. This was announced by NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Sweden, Estonia and Finland have also pledged to contribute to this fund. The PURL system has been in operation since August of this year, as Washington now refuses to simply hand over weapons to Ukraine and instead demands payment from its partners. NATO allies also discussed today how to create a drone wall to counter Russia. They want to launch the new drone defense system by the end of 2027. And Germany has taken the initiative to create such an EU air defense shield. The local defense minister Boris Pistorius announced that they will invest 10 billion euros in all types of UAVs. In addition, during today's North Atlantic Alliance meeting, the Czech side revealed details of its initiative to provide Ukraine with ammunition. Defense Minister Jana Chernochova reported that foreign donors have provided $4.5 billion for this project. With this money, they managed to organize the supply of 3,700,000 artillery shells for the Ukrainian army. Despite these figures, analysts from the Kiel Institute for the World Economy report that military aid to Kyiv in July and August dropped by 43% compared to the first half of the year. More details about the NATO meeting and their new security priorities in a report from Brussels at the Alliance headquarters by Radio Svoboda correspondent Zoriana Stepanenko.
There is a lot of talk at NATO headquarters about American Tomahawks, which, if they appear in Ukraine, would in some way unlock a new level of support from its allies. First and foremost, these discussions are among journalists. European ministers respond to them by saying they will support any decision that strengthens Ukraine's long-range capabilities. It is believed that these very long-range capabilities will influence the course of the war. However, Secretary General Rutte made it clear, as expected, that the ministers of the allied countries would not be discussing Tomahawks here, saying, "This is a matter for the United States and Ukraine." But assistance to Ukraine remains a constant item on the agenda of the alliance countries. Among the key directions is the relatively new PURL initiative, which involves other NATO allies purchasing American weapons for Ukraine. The head of the Pentagon expects that more countries will plan purchases of weapons on the American market, and that these decisions will be directly linked to achieving peace in Ukraine.
The commitments will soon be transformed into capabilities, which is the most important aspect, and one of its components, of course, is PURL. If there's one thing we learned during President Trump's term, it's the active use of force to achieve peace. Peace is achieved through strength, not loud words or finger-pointing threats. It is achieved through strength when you have strong and real capabilities that are respected by your adversaries.
Currently, 13 countries have purchased or are planning to purchase aid packages for Ukraine under this initiative. Today, Finland joined this list. Its Minister of Defense announced the corresponding intention to journalists. Why American weapons? First, the European defense industry has not increased its production capacity to a scale that would meet Ukraine's needs. Second, it is the American arsenal that contains weapons with no counterparts in terms of effectiveness. At least that's how Ukraine's ambassador to NATO explained it to us. Her delegation, led by Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal, is persuading partners here to take an active role, and the Secretary General of the Alliance is optimistic about this.
There is every good reason to firmly believe today that many other sovereign countries will certainly sign on to this extremely important and vital assistance, including advanced air defense systems and, in particular, crucial interceptor missiles, which are absolutely essential for Ukraine to ensure the maximum possible protection of its civilian population and critical vital infrastructure from constant and relentless Russian attacks.
Some countries have already announced new military aid packages for Ukraine today. The Netherlands is investing $90 million in drone production in Ukraine. There is unused capacity there. Estonia is also providing a batch of drones. However, the defense minister of this Baltic country also emphasizes a worrying trend, the decrease in the volume of military aid to Ukraine. Rutte did not agree with this statement. Our sources in diplomatic circles within the alliance point out that the purchase of American weapons for Ukraine began in the middle of the budget year and suggest that this may have affected what some consider to be the slow pace of investment. The countries have already planned all their expenditures for this year. They will soon start planning for the next year so they can allocate resources for Ukraine's needs as well. All the more so because the outcome of the war there will determine whether there will be peace in Europe. Today, many NATO country ministers emphasize this point. From Brussels, Zoriana Stepanenko, Marek Hajduk, Radio Liberty, especially for TSN 1+1.
A serious blow to the heart of Putin's war financing. The United Kingdom has imposed some of the toughest sanctions against the Kremlin's energy sector. 91 legal entities and individuals were added to the list of restrictions, including the largest oil companies Rosneft and Lukoil. Also targeted by the sanctions are 51 vessels linked to the so-called shadow fleet of the Kremlin, a number of banks, and the Russian national payment card system. As explained by the British government, everyone who has come under their economic restrictions has helped fuel the Russian war machine. For example, the companies Rosneft and Lukoil together export more than 3 million barrels of oil every day. It is noteworthy that all these measures coincide with the start of Russian Energy Week in Moscow, which undermines Putin's efforts to promote his main source of funding in the world. As a result of Russian shelling, emergency power outage schedules were introduced in the morning in the Dnipropetrovsk region. At night, critical infrastructure in several districts came under enemy fire. In the Chernihiv region, restoration work is still ongoing after previous shelling. And there are also partial power outages there, and emergency shutdowns are being implemented in Sumy and Cherkasy regions as well. At the moment, there is no information on how long they will last. Ukrenergo is asking people to reduce their use of electrical appliances whenever possible, and this request applies to all of Ukraine. 3 districts of Kyiv were without electricity last night. Even more Kyiv residents are without water. All of this is due to overloaded power grids. Around 1 in the morning, energy workers reported that they had fixed the damage, so the supply of resources is being restored. What happened is a technical malfunction, which also occurred during peacetime, says acting head of the State Energy Supervision Inspectorate, Anatoly Zamovko. And he asked Ukrainians to be understanding about the temporary difficulties, because in addition to the shelling, the work of energy workers is now also complicated by the cold weather and increased load on the power system.
Right now, we're saying that restrictions have been practically lifted across almost the entire territory, except, let's say, for Chernihiv region, where we still have scheduled hourly outages because previous strikes hit critical energy infrastructure, which is currently being repaired. Obviously, this should also include certain charging devices. Clearly, there should also be some preparations for insulating both the premises and oneself because, well, there's only one way out of this situation. We have to take care of ourselves, ensure our own safety, and look after our own capabilities.
And now about the light that came in handy during total darkness. Kyiv resident Violeta Tereshchenko, after the power outage, posted a photo of a ring in a box that has a built-in light. It turned out that her boyfriend Artem proposed to her and gave her this box, which became the only source of light in the apartment. This story gathered thousands of likes and reposts. Social media users write, "Love is the brightest light." Give this episode a like as well, so you'll always stay up to date with the information prepared by TSN. And let us know in the comments what you think of this story. And now let's move on. The oil depot in Feodosia is finished. Ukraine's defense forces have carried out a second strike on the marine oil terminal facility, destroying 16 fuel tanks that survived the previous attack, according to the General Staff. A large-scale fire has been raging at the site for several days now. The oil terminal in Feodosia is a key link in the occupiers' logistics chain. The total volume of fuel that could be stored in the tanks is about 193,000 cubic meters, according to the report. In addition, the defense forces also struck a P-18 radar station in Chervona Polyana in occupied Crimea, a UAV control center in occupied Oleshki, and an ammunition depot near Makivka. Russia will feel the effects of Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries until the middle of next year. This is what Bloomberg reports about the losses suffered by the aggressor country. According to the International Energy Agency, oil refining in the aggressor country has dropped by 500,000 barrels per day. The export of refined fuel has reached its lowest level in 10 years, and total oil revenues are at their lowest in 3 months. Meanwhile, Reuters notes that Russia's seaborne export of oil products in September decreased by 17%. Analysts emphasize that strikes on oil refineries are creating long-term pressure on the budget. To compensate for the decline, Moscow is trying to increase crude oil exports. Meanwhile, Kyiv promises that strikes on Russian oil refineries will continue. They are sending the wrong signal to Putin. The European Commission criticized today's visit of the Hungarian foreign minister to Moscow for the Energy Forum. The lead spokesperson for foreign affairs, Anita Hipper, stated that it is fundamental for the EU that any bilateral contacts by member states align with the position and policy of the European Union, especially when our relations with third countries have been reduced to a minimum. And the current visit, especially at a time when Brussels is working on sanctions and increasing support for Ukraine, sends the wrong signal to Putin. Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó, at a conference in Moscow, decided to complain about the European Union's energy policy. He claimed that his country would suffer if it were cut off from Russian energy resources and that national interests are a top priority for Budapest. The official also added that he does not understand why Budapest should break off relations with Moscow, since, as he stated, Russia has never let them down and deliveries have always arrived. Earlier, American President Donald Trump called on Budapest to stop buying Russian oil. Meanwhile, the Hungarian side continues to oppose the European Commission's plans to gradually phase out all imports of Russian gas and liquefied natural gas to the EU by the end of 2027. There are 10 times more young Ukrainians seeking protection in Germany. According to the country's Ministry of Internal Affairs, the number of applications has increased significantly. Previously, there were almost 100 requests for protection per week. Now it's about 1,000. This happened after Ukraine changed the rules for men aged 18 to 22 leaving the country. This was reported by a German publication citing the Ministry of Internal Affairs. The agency is currently unable to assess whether this is a temporary phenomenon or a new trend. To date, nearly 1,290,000 Ukrainians who arrived due to Russia's war have been registered in Germany. Ukrainian citizens have a special status that allows them to immediately obtain a residence permit, work, and receive benefits without going through the standard asylum procedure. The German government wants to reduce social assistance, and the European Union is preparing to end the temporary protection program for Ukrainian citizens next year. Against the backdrop of the Russian threat, Sweden is updating its shelters. The country is increasing its civil defense budget sevenfold and restoring dozens of shelters. How long will the process take? What difficulties are the Swedes facing? TSN correspondent Katarina Fedorshenko invites us to take a look inside a shelter in the center of Stockholm.
In case of danger, residents of the Swedish capital will have to do what Ukrainians have already gotten used to, spend the night in a parking garage. This shelter was carved into the rock back during World War II, and it was renovated last month. So during an attack, the cars will be evacuated from here, and instead the shelter will be able to accommodate 1,200 people.
The shelter can withstand an explosion, shrapnel, and other consequences of a bombing. And it's also airtight, so it can even withstand the effects of biogas, chemical gases, and even radioactive substances.
Sweden began actively renovating shelters last year. Every year, 100 million kroner will be allocated for this. That's about $9 million. First, they want to renovate the large shelters that can accommodate more than 1,000 people. There are dozens of such shelters in the country, dating back to the last century. Currently, repairs are in full swing at 24 of them. In total, there are 64,000 shelters in the country. So when all of them will be renovated remains an open question.
100 million a year is not enough for all 64,000. But I think it depends on the government, how much time it wants to allocate money for this. However, the government intends to renovate all the shelters in Sweden. And once we have renovated all the shelters, we might start building new ones.
Last year, for the first time since the Cold War, Sweden updated its civil defense booklet, adding information about self-defense, psychological protection, digital security, and protection against air attacks. When asked whether citizens are now well prepared, not everyone gives an affirmative answer.
I don't think we are very well prepared. Some information comes to you by mail and so on. But I'm not sure. We in Sweden are not used to crises.
Stockholm believes that the military threat to Sweden has increased and does not rule out the possibility of an armed attack, particularly from Moscow. However, while the Swedes, together with other European allies, are only beginning to prepare for defense against Russia, the Institute for the Study of War warns Moscow may attack NATO countries much earlier than Europe predicts. Experts note that the Kremlin is stepping up sabotage and reconnaissance missions. Therefore, a serious threat to the alliance may arise soon. Katarina Fedorshenko, TSN 1+1.
The mayor of Odessa, Hennady Trukhanov, has been stripped of Ukrainian citizenship by presidential decree, since according to investigators, he also holds Russian citizenship. As a result, Trukhanov automatically loses his authority and can no longer serve as mayor. Instead, a city military administration is beginning its work in Odessa. Who will head it and how Odessa residents have reacted to the recent events? Our correspondent Serhiy Osachuk will tell you.
Worried deputies, stunned Odessa residents, and a demonstration in support of stripping Hennady Trukhanov of Ukrainian citizenship, Odessa has been in turmoil for the second day.
A military administration for Odessa. Moscows go to Moscow.
The day before, more than 50 activists even popped champagne to celebrate the extraordinary news. Since yesterday in Odessa, everyone is talking only about the mayor. Will Trukhanov really leave his post, and who will replace him? Behind me is the building of the Odessa City Hall, where heated debates have been raging for the second day. Why has Trukhanov's Russian citizenship been discussed since 2014, but the decision to strip him of Ukrainian citizenship was made only now? According to the investigation, the Ukrainian official received a renewed foreign passport of the occupying country back in 2015. His internal Russian passport was confiscated by a court in the Moscow region in 2017. However, the cancellation or renunciation of such a document does not strip one of Russian citizenship. The documents presented by the SBU are fake. He has never had a Russian passport. This, in turn, is what Hennady Trukhanov himself claims.
I have never had and do not have Russian citizenship. I have all the necessary documents to prove this. That's why I will fight, I will defend myself, and I am confident in my victory.
He adds that, as the head of the city administration, he underwent special background checks in the past, and there were never any issues with him. He says he will appeal to the U.S. diplomatic corps so that they make official inquiries to Russia regarding whether he holds citizenship of the aggressor country.
We looked at the documents that were announced, seized, confiscated by the security service of Ukraine. The person who supposedly signed this document on behalf of the Russian Federation has been behind bars since 2022. They haven't worked for 3 years. The signatory, the form which belongs to the police, was signed. The stamp is from the FMS service, which was disbanded in their country back in 2016 and issued all the permits. So I passed all these checks.
On the eve of the decree to strip Trukhanov of his citizenship, a corresponding petition appeared on the president's website, signed by more than 25,000 people. Activists are pleased that Trukhanov, having been stripped of Ukrainian citizenship, will be removed from his post.
I believe this is the deoccupation of Odessa from a person who, for a long time now, he shouldn't have been mayor anymore. This is a person with Russian citizenship, a person with countless, endless criminal cases against him. It's a disgrace for Odessa.
At the rally that took place the day before, Trukhanov was mentioned often for how he resisted the removal of communist monuments, for the deaths of people after the recent flood in the city, and for the fire at the Victoria camp, where children died. Activists are demanding that the court cases involving Hennady Trukhanov be brought to a conclusion.
Of course, for example, I would like to see him behind bars for a long time, because in my opinion there are plenty of arguments for this, both from the security service of Ukraine and from anti-corruption agencies.
This was completely unacceptable from the very beginning, even back in 2017, when everyone already knew about this citizenship. We were waiting for these decisions from Petro Alexievich Poroshenko, who did not take action and did not make the decision we were all expecting.
So who will replace Trukhanov? Just the day before, the president stated in his address, the city deserves greater protection and more support.
This can be done in the format of a military administration. Far too many security issues in Odessa have gone unanswered for far too long. All effective decisions will be made. I will appoint the head of the military administration in the near future.
It was immediately rumored, albeit unofficially, that the head of the Dnipropetrovsk Regional Military Administration, Serhiy Lysak, would lead the military administration. Today, the head of the Odessa Regional Administration, Ole Kieper, explained why this particular official is being considered.
The military command has decided that this position should be filled by a person who was born in the city of Odessa, an experienced officer with combat experience who will be of great help to our residents during these difficult times.
For now, Odessa is waiting for the arrival of its new leader. And here in the City Hall building, it's as if time has stopped. Right now, the main question for Odessa residents is how the city will get through what may be one of its toughest winters. How quickly will the new team with new specialists be able to get things running? Serhiy Osachuk, Serhiy Heleniak, Odessa, TSN 1+1.